We have been the last 2 months. Last month was a different series, but this month we've been also following along with the text that our children are using on Sundays. And this concept of game show is about self-control. It's about making wise choices. It's choosing to do the right thing. And their memory verse comes from 1 Peter, and it says this. It says, God's power has given us everything we need to lead a godly life. And so the first week we talked about preparing ourselves to make the right choices and how that there is some preparation that goes into making the right choices. And then the week after that we talked about thinking before we speak, right? And then last week Ryan talked to us about thinking before we act. And this week we're going to talk about this concept of know when to stop. Anybody ever had a problem with not knowing? I don't think it's always not knowing when to stop. I think a lot of times we know when to stop. We just don't have the discipline to stop when we know to stop, right? And so we want to talk a little bit about knowing when to stop and having the discipline to know when to stop. Now, so we don't do Sunday night services here. We haven't done Sunday night services here in about 15 years. 2008 probably, I would guess, that we haven't done Sunday night services here on a weekly basis. But if you were to ask me what I miss about Sunday nights, it wouldn't be the chance to preach again, right? Because I get to do that twice on Sunday morning. I don't miss having to prepare another sermon. I don't miss a lot of the things that would have happened on a Sunday night. The thing I miss the most about Sunday night church is going out to eat, right? After church. That's the thing I miss. I will tell you that the reason why I am here at Open Door and have some of the lifelong friendships that I do is because when Barbara and I showed up here, shortly after we showed up, some couples invited us to go to eat on Sunday night to the Tasty Freeze, right? It's now just the freeze, right? They lost the tasty part. And it's I hadn't even thought about that until it started coming out of my mouth. But anyway, it's just the freeze now. And we would go there every Sunday night after church. Like that was I see some of the folks that would go with us. Like I built lifelong friendships after church on Sunday night. And so I grew up in church with Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and pretty much every other night of the week it felt like. And on Sunday night, we would always go out to eat. And when I was living in Lumberton, we had a lot more options. Like we had the church restaurant. Do y'all know what the church restaurant is? Shoney's. And in the tribe I grew up in, if there was a Shoney's close by after church, you went to Shoney's, right? I'm pretty positive they're going to have that hot fudge cake at the marriage supper of the Lamb. And if you've never even had one, I'm questioning your salvation, right? Because like if you went to church, you went to Shoney's and you got a hot fudge cake. That was just the way it was, you know. But in Lumberton, we had a lot more options. So that's where I lived before I moved up here to northeastern North Carolina. My dad was pastoring there. And we had a Cracker Barrel. On one Sunday night, we went to Cracker Barrel after church. And there was a group of maybe 20 of us, and my kids were really small. When I say small, I mean like 3, 4, 5 years old. And their menu consisted of French fries, probably. That was about it, right? They didn't eat a whole lot. They liked to eat French fries. So we all placed our order, and I don't know why it happened this way, but they gave us the newest waiter in the whole place. I don't know if it was his first day, but he was green, and when I say green, I mean a bright neon green, like he was brand new, fresh. And he came to our table and he took our order. We ordered French fries for the kids. And in a few minutes, he comes back to the table and he says, "Do your kids want anything else? We're out of French fries." Right? Okay. So the kid's mom, she starts flipping through the menu and he can't help himself. About 30 seconds into her looking in the menu. He said, we're not out of French fries, but we're close to closing time, and the cook didn't want to cook any more French fries. See? Yeah. I wish I could show y'all my notes because I wrote, in my notes, right? That's exactly what I wrote because I was like, oh, Lord, this ain't going to turn out good. Boy, the kid's mom, she lit up. She goes and finds the manager and she gives him a piece of her mind. Our food comes to the table. Nobody comes back to the table. Our food comes to the table eventually, and there's French fries. And this green waiter, right, who had already made the mistake of saying the cook don't want to cook any, when he puts the French fries down, he said, anybody at the table that would like French fries can have French fries. He said the manager went and chewed the cook out, and the cook got mad, and he cooked every French fry we had in the freezer. He said, we got French fries all over the kitchen, on every table. He said they're on the floor. They're everywhere, right? And so when I read this text, like you can have too much, when I was thinking about it, the first thing that popped into my mind was that cook cooking all of those French fries and leaving them all over the kitchen. The reality is, French fries are good, by the way. I don't know if y'all like French fries. I like French fries, right? If a diet says I can't have French fries, guess what I don't do? That diet, that's right. But I like French fries, but too many French fries can be a problem, right? I'm sure that manager was, I don't even know how people kept their jobs, right? It was just one of those hilarious situations to me. But we can have too much of a good thing. There is almost nothing. I'm scared to say there is nothing you can't have too much of, because I think there probably could be some cases made that there are some things that you can't have too much of, like Jesus, right? And so I don't want anybody getting super spiritual on me and say, well, there are some things, but so almost nothing that you can't get too much of. But here's what I will say. You can get too much of a good thing. It doesn't have to be bad, right? So one of the mistakes that we make, especially in Christianity, is we think if you get rid of all of the bad things that everything's going to be fine. But the reality is you can have too much of a good thing. And I would say the places where we struggle the most are in our strengths and in our weaknesses. And sometimes our strengths and our weaknesses are exactly the same thing. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. So everything in your life is not a strength and a weakness. So our staff went through a book called Working Genius by Patrick Lencioni, and he breaks it down. He says you got two, and two. So you got two areas that are working genius. You've got two areas that are working competencies. And then you've got two areas that are working frustrations, right? And so those strengths and weaknesses are what I'm talking about. And a lot of times they're exactly the same thing. So you can falter in your strength and you can falter in your weakness. So let me give you an idea of what I mean by how a strength becomes a weakness. So I am a natural risk taker. It comes natural to me. Like if I could lose everything and get up the next day and start over again, right? That's just how I'm made. I don't think about it in terms of wins. I do think about it in terms of wins and losses, but I'm not overwhelmed by risk. And then what I would tell you is that most business owners have a pretty high tolerance for risk. You don't go into business unless you have some risk tolerance, right? That's just the reality of it. And the reason why most people don't go into business is because they don't have that tolerance for risk that's present. Now, here's the danger of that. It benefits me in a lot of places. Having a high tolerance for risk benefits me in a lot of areas of my life, but can also be a detriment, right? It can be a weakness because I am willing to risk everything, right? If you risk everything and you win, you doubled, right? But if you risk everything and you lose, you have zero. right? And so that can be a real negative problem. And so a strength can also be a weakness. And I would say most of the time, the places where you are strong, all right, so whatever your strengths are, one of the reasons why you can do too much of it is because you find fulfillment in what you do well. And so you do more of what you do well so that you can be fulfilled even more. And then you do more so you can be fulfilled even more. And eventually you're doing too much instead of measuring what needs to be done. So having the discipline to stop is the key, I think, to success. All success is having the ability to stop. So I want to look at two things, and I think we can, some of these we'll understand, some of these you'll go, I hadn't really thought about it that way, maybe. So here's the first one. Sweet things can become sick. If I was to ask you, like, what can you have too much of, right? You would name things that resembled what appeared in verse 16 that we read. It says, do you like honey? Don't eat too much, or it will make you sick, right? If I was to ask you, what things can you have too much of, or should you not have too much of? These would be easy things to name, right? Don't eat too much cake. Don't eat too much honey, right? I've never seen anybody other than Winnie the Pooh have a problem with honey. And they even wrote a song, right? There's a song about, in one of the Winnie the Pooh episodes called Too Much Honey. It says, too much honey, fill your bowl, too much honey, free your soul, too much honey, right? And it goes on to talk about, like, it begins with, woohoo, this is good for the soul, but by the time you get to the end of the song, they're describing how sick it makes you if you have too much honey. And so we would say, right, easily, if I was asking you, what should we avoid? Should we not have too much of? Sweets and sugar, right, would be a natural place that most of us would start by saying, yeah, you probably shouldn't have too much sugar. You probably shouldn't have too much honey. This is how I would describe it. Almost anything that is a treat or a pleasure can quickly become overdone. Almost anything that is a treat or a pleasure can quickly become overdone. So let me give you some things that I think are treats or pleasure. They're not necessities of life. They're just treats or pleasures, but they can quickly become overdone. Maybe number one on my list right now in the world which we live in would be social media. All right, it's a treat. It's not necessary. None of you are going to die if Facebook goes out of business tomorrow, right? You may have some withdrawals, right? But you're not going to die. It's not a necessity for you to have. But too much of it, too much of any kind of social media is bad for your mental health. It's bad for your physical health. It's bad for your spiritual health, right? You don't have to scroll very far into a news feed to go, whew, right? Especially during this season. People that don't even have opinions suddenly got something, right? This makes it it just makes it difficult. So social media is one of those things that is a treat or a pleasure. Any type of entertainment, right? You can get too much of. There's nothing wrong with TV. I grew up where some people said TV was bad, right? Throw them out of the house. You shouldn't have them. You can't have them, right? They called them televisions. They didn't even call them televisions. And some of y'all had never heard that, had you? But it was bad. I don't want to say TV is bad, but here's what I'm telling you. You can't have too much of it, right? If you've watched enough that the station's watermark that you watch has become emblazoned on your TV, right? You're watching too much, right? Any kind of entertainment, it doesn't matter what it is, because they distract you from other things that you should be doing, things that are sensual or passionate, right? And I could be descriptive here, but I don't need to. Those things can become overdone and be problems for us really, really quick. And if we are not careful, if we don't guard against the sweet things of life, we may find ourselves sick, and not necessarily physically sick, right? So one of the things that when I go to pray for somebody that is physically sick, I always pray for their mind and their heart. Do you know why? Have you ever met somebody who was physically sick and had been sick for a long period of time? What do you notice about them? Most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, it begins to affect them mentally, and it begins to affect them spiritually or emotionally. And so when I pray for people who are physically sick, I pray for their spirit or their emotions and their mind, because after a while it begins to take a toll on you. And so when you eat too much honey, right? When you eat too much honey and it begins to affect you physically, right? Makes you sick to your stomach, makes your stomach bigger than it was, right? There's some side effects to too much honey, right? Other than sick. But when we eat too much honey, our body begins to swell, right? Okay, that's problem number one. But what happens, right, when you start gaining weight? It starts to affect the rest of your health, right? Your knees can't hold up as good as they could. But then it also starts to affect your emotions and your mind, because you go to put on those clothes and they don't fit like they used to, right? You can't get that button that you can't get that dress on, or that shirt don't fix, and it begins to affect your emotions. You go, oh, I'm fat, right? I've gained too much weight. I need to stop eating. Then we get on ourselves mentally, and our mind goes down, our emotions goes down, and our body goes down. And so when he is warning against too much of a good thing, he's not just warning us to take care of our body. He is also helping us understand that it has an effect on our entire being when we don't do the things that we're supposed to do. Moderation will usually help us avoid the traps of privilege and pleasure. If we can learn to be moderate, right? If we can learn to moderate things, it'll help us avoid the traps that come with pleasurable things and privileged things. But here's the second piece of this. Necessary things can also become nasty. It's not just dessert that you get too much of. Right? Last night, my wife cooked spaghetti. It's one of my favorite comfort foods. It's not number one, but it's close. I had 2 helpings. I wanted a third, but I just finished reading my notes. And I was like, well, maybe I shouldn't. Guess what? I got to eat, right? You have to eat. But you can also get too much of things that you have to have. And that's the mistake that we miss sometimes. It's like we're easy to identify too much honey, too much sweets, too much cake, but we don't always pay attention to the things that are necessary for our lives to function, but that we can have too much of or too little of. And so I wanted to go over a story that would help illustrate this. The children of Israel have left Egypt, right? They're out wandering in the wilderness. They're hungry, and they're trying to figure out what's going to happen. And in Exodus chapter 16, it says this. It says, the Lord said to Moses, I have heard the Israelites' complaints. Now tell them, in the evening you will have meat to eat, and in the morning you will have all the bread you want. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God. That evening, vast numbers of quail flew in and covered the camp. And the next morning, the area around the camp was wet with dew. When the dew evaporated, a flaky substance as fine as frost blanketed the ground. The Israelites were puzzled when they saw it. What is it? They asked each other. They had no idea what it was. And Moses told them, it is the food the Lord has given you to eat. These are the Lord's instructions, right? So he gave food and he gave instructions, right? Just let me just stop right here and say to you, just because the Lord gives it to you doesn't mean you get to do what you want to with it, right? Sometimes what he gives you comes with some parameters, some instructions. And it says, these are the Lord's instructions. Each household should gather as much as it needs. So don't go without. It says, pick up 2 quarts for each person in your tent. So the people of Israel did as they were told. Some gathered a lot, some only a little. But when they measured it out, everyone had just enough. Those who gathered a lot had nothing left over, and those who gathered only a little had enough. Each family had just what it needed. Then Moses told them, do not keep any of it until morning. But surprise, some of them didn't listen and kept it until morning. But by then it was full of maggots and had a terrible smell. Moses was very angry at them. They were complaining to God because they were hungry, and God was trying to say, okay, I'm going to give you something. He gives them quail at night. In the morning, he gives them manna. He says, this is how much you should have. This is how much you should use. Use it all. Don't keep any until the next day. But some of them didn't listen, right? I think we've all been in that boat where we were the ones not listening to whatever the instruction was, and we chose to do whatever we wanted to do. And so what happened was it turned bad on them. What was good for a period of time became nasty really quick. And there are a lot of things in our lives that are necessary. You need to do them, right? You should be doing them. But if you do them too much, this morning as I was walking, I was thinking, right, yesterday, I was looking out the window of my house to the pool. Something caught my moving out by the pool, so I looked, and there was a squirrel leaning over like hanging by his hind feet into my pool drinking water. I've never seen that before in my life. He's drinking salt water. How dry does it have to be for a squirrel to come looking for water in a pool, right? But that's the problem that we have. It's dry right now. And we need rain. How many of you would agree we need rain? But Western North Carolina is dealing with devastation of what happens when you get too much of something that you need. Right? And sometimes we don't think that way. But let me list off some things that I think are necessary, but we can do too much of it. I'll use one that gets said around my house frequently. This is exactly how she says it to me. You got too many words right now. Give some of you a new line to use, right? You got too many words right now, right? And what she means is, I need to shut up, right? And look, I got to talk. I can't preach in sign language, right? I can't write enough to do well, right? That's not it. I got to talk, right? It's one of the things I got to talk. It's part of who I am. We all need to talk, right? But there's a line that you can cross where you talk too much, right? We just talked about this 2 weeks ago. There's a line that you can cross where you said too much. So words are a place that you can. I'll tell you something else that you should probably be doing that you can have too much of. Sleep. Now, some of you in here don't know what that's like, right? But the Bible tells us pretty clear. It says a little sleep, a little slumber, and you're going to go broke. Poverty's going to sneak up on you and overtake you if you sleep too much. Do you need to sleep? The answer to that is yes. Do you need a reasonable amount of sleep? The answer to that is yes. But if you sleep too much, you're going to miss out on some things that you need to be doing, right? And one of those is work, right? So let's talk about the sleepers and the resters. Like some of you, if you could be paid for sleeping and resting, you would be a multimillionaire, right? You've got that part down. But the work part comes hard for you. But on the other side of that are the workers. The scripture is very clear that we need to work. It tells us that if we don't work, we don't eat, right? There are some things that go together, like we have to work. But can I tell you, you can work too much. You can spend too much time. And if you find your fulfillment in work, then what you will find yourself doing is working longer than you should, more than you should, harder than you should, so that you can be fulfilled either by the money that you get, or the accolades that you get, or the prestige that you get from the job that you have. You can work too much. Do you need to work? The answer to that is yes. It is a biblical command for us to be fruitful and multiply, for us to do things that we have been gifted to do. But can we do too much of it? The answer is yes. Here's one, and I guarantee you nobody in this room is going to say that it's a problem for them. You can have too much money. Some of y'all are like, well, preach to somebody else. Right? If they got it, tell them to give it to me. Whatever your answer is, right? But you can, right? What is the tension? What's enough? Right? Where do you get that you have had enough? And what do you do with it when you do get enough? What's the answer, right? There's a real tension. Right? Because for some people, like this amount would be, like if I had that, that would be too much. While other people, it's relative, right? It's contextual. You got to, depends on where you're at and where you come from and what you have, you know. But you can have too much money because at some point it becomes a stress point to you. You've got to figure out what you're going to do with it. It can be a draw away spiritually. Listen, you have to be careful how you deal with it. You can have too much exercise. I know that's just as bad as money. Most of us in this room ain't got that much problem, right? I can look around and see there ain't many over-exercised folks in this room. But you can exercise too much, right? If you don't stop and not exercise, you don't give your body time enough to recuperate, and your body will eventually deteriorate because you have spent too much time working it. You can exercise too much. We've already talked about sugar and sweets, but you can eat too much, and you can eat too much healthy. You can drink too much water. Did y'all know that? Like I decided to look up things you could do too much of, and drinking water was it was at the top of the list. Like you can drink too much water to where you flush everything, even good things out of your body, and it's not healthy for you. We're far enough past COVID that I can talk about hand washing. I didn't realize it was something that people didn't know how to do. Right? And I watch. I go to the men's bathroom. Did y'all know? Lord, this statistic, I'd never thought I'd find a place to use this in a sermon, but here it is. Almost 60% of men do not wash their hands after going to the restroom. Right? That's why fist bumps are great. Look it up. But can I tell you something? You can wash your hands too much. I know that's not a problem for most people, but you can wash your hands too much. I know some people. I at least know two people who are have some struggles with obsessive compulsive disorder, and they wash their hands so much that their hands are raw on a regular basis. Right? You can wash your hands too much. You can take too many vitamins. Right? It's a good thing, things you need, but you can take too much. You can take too many antibiotics. There's a lot of conversation about can we give too many antibiotics to people that it creates these mutations that create other problems in people's life. Like you can have too much of a good thing. See, we talk a lot about things like freedom and coloring outside the lines and blazing our own path. And I understand, listen, I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all solution to how much you should eat and how much you should exercise. It's going to be different for everybody in this room, right? It's different. I'm 57. What I can eat today is different than what I could eat at 27 and it not have an effect on me. It changes over time. There's not a one-size-fits-all solution, but here's what I will tell you. some of the greatest successes you will have in your life will happen within boundaries. Your finances will be better if you operate in a budget. Your health will be better if you operate within reason of what you should eat and how you should exercise. You see, if you pay attention, there are going to be warning signs long before there's danger. If you're paying attention to your body, if you're paying attention to your relationships, if you're paying attention to your habits, there will be warning signs that there are issues long before there is danger. And usually we wait until there is danger before we do anything about it, when we should be paying attention to the warning signs that are coming ahead of the trouble. You see, there are things in your life that are necessary, but if you are not careful, they will lead you down a path that is extremely dangerous. The last fruit of the Spirit. I grew up with the word temperance. The more modern translations say self-control. But let me give you a definition of that. It is a spirit-wrought fruit in a believer's life that manifests itself in godly abstinence of sinful passions and moderation of even good desires in conformity to Christ. Temperance or self-control is the ability to avoid the sinful passions, but also to keep in moderation the things that are even good in your life. The question I would ask you today is, are you or have you taken any inventory of the things that you may be getting too much of? Have you asked yourself, are there some places I need to pull back? Have you asked yourself, are there some places that it would be wise if I didn't do that as much? And it's not all sinful, right? The sinful things are easy for us to point out. Yes, you shouldn't do that. Yes, you shouldn't. There's a lot of don'ts, but it's the do's that cause us a lot of problems. It is the things that we have permission to do, maybe even need to do, that sometimes we do too much. Today's bottom line is this: know when to stop. Know when to stop. And I said this at the beginning, and I want to reiterate this here. I don't think it's enough to know when to stop, because I'm just going to speak for myself. There have been some times when I was standing at the line and I knew, right? Just to give you that example of when she tells me, you got too many words. There have been some times when I was standing at the line and I knew I had too many words, but I was going to say one more, right? And it didn't turn out so good. Some of y'all know what I'm talking about. I'm going to try one more thing. I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to work one more hour. I'm a pretty good grandparent. My grandkids love me. I want a great parent. Because I love to work, and I missed a lot. And if I could hit the reverse button, there were some things they wouldn't have gotten because I didn't work, but there would be some things that they did get that would have been far more valuable. And it's so easy to convince ourselves that one more hour at work, one more day of overtime, I just need this much money for my retirement account. I just need, there's so many ways we can convince ourselves, we can rationalize why we should do it. I just want to challenge you. Don't just know when to stop. Pray for the discipline and the power of the Holy Spirit, the fruit of the Holy Spirit, to have self-control, temperance, so that you do stop. You know what's healthy.